We're going to leave that report there because, as promised, we're going to take you to that Freedom Charter event, a commemoration held by the ANC tonight. The party's president, I can see him in my view there, Cyril Ramaphosa, about to speak.
Amandla! Amandla! Forward with the Freedom Charter, forward. Forward with the African National Congress, forward. Forward with COSAS, forward. Forward with SASCO, forward. I did not mention those two when we opened, so I thought I should mention them. Comrades, the leadership of our movement, both at national level, the national officials, members of the National Executive Committee, provincial chairs, provincial committees, regional committees, and branch delegates who are here today. I also want to greet Isitwalandwe, Comrade Sophie de Brain, who has been with us in this NGC throughout. We extend our greetings to her. I did not see the others, but as I walked in, I saw Comrade Sophie. I also, as I did when we opened, greet the leadership of our leagues and the various leadership of other alliance organizations that are here present, COSATU, the SACP, and SANCO. Comrades, we gather as we do as members of the African National Congress and guests to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the Freedom Charter. We gather here to recall the momentous events that took place at the Congress of the People in Kliptown on the 26th of June, 1955. We did get an explanation why we could not celebrate it at the time in June. There were just too many other things happening. And leading up to the G20, we thought that we should do it during the NGC. As it turns out, it was a good decision because all of us are here representing the various branches of our movement. Today, 70 years later, we celebrate this document, not as a historical artifact, but as an enduring vision of a free and democratic society that continues to inspire and guide our struggle. It was the late President O.R. Tambo who said, the Freedom Charter was not just another political document. The Congress of the People was not just another conference. The Freedom Charter is the sum total of our aspirations, but more, it is the road to the new life. In this NGC, we have had to ask ourselves whether the National Democratic Revolution is still on course. That would have occupied the discussions in the various commissions that took place today. We will get the report tomorrow. The Freedom Charter and the concept of the National Democratic Revolution are closely linked within the ideology and the history of South Africa's liberation movement, particularly the African National Congress, and indeed the alliance as a whole. The National Democratic Revolution is the strategic and theoretical process through which the Freedom Charter's vision is realized in practice. The NDR is built upon the Freedom Charter's foundation. And the Freedom Charter outlines a set of ideals and aspirations, and the NDR sets out the ongoing transformation strategy to achieve the national democratic society that is envisaged in the Freedom Charter. So there is a clear linkage. In building a national democratic society, we firstly seek to build a united, capable, and ethical developmental state based on the will of the people, regardless of race, sex, it should be gender, belief, language, ethnicity, or geography, incorporating representative participation and deliberative elements so that the people shall govern, a key element or aspiration articulated in the Freedom Charter. Secondly, to achieve the national democratic society, we need to improve the quality of life for all through access to affordable, basic quality services, equal rights, and human dignity, and the broad opportunities for every citizen. Thirdly, to build an inclusive, transformed, and thriving economy that offers decent livelihoods to all, including restoring the rights of all South Africans to access land, the nation's wealth, finance, and other resources within a growing, integrated African continental economy. And fourthly, to build a nation with a common identity as an African country underpinned by non-racialism, non-sexism, unity, diversity, and a spirit of global human solidarity. The Freedom Charter is therefore the foundation of the South African society that we have solemnly undertaken to build. The Congress of the People was the culmination of centuries of resistance and decades of struggle. In order to resolve the problem of colonialism and later apartheid, the leaders of the Congress movement, as it emerged, always sought to come up with strategic solutions reflected in seminal documents that would unite the Congress movement, that would express our people's needs and aspirations, that would present a principled alternative to colonialism and apartheid with a view to guide future action and inspire the oppressed masses to continue fighting for freedom and justice. That was the wisdom of our leaders from time immemorial. As the Union of South Africa was established in 1910, to the exclusion of the majority of our people, African leaders came together from across the country to form the South African Native National Congress. In 1923, this organization, now known as the ANC, produced the first iconic document called the Bill of Rights in South Africa's history. As the Second World War raged and the African Atlantic Charter, which was adopted by the Allies who were fighting in the Second World War, as it appeared to point the way to a new world order, the wise leaders of the African National Congress produced a document called the African Claims. In 1954, the Federation of South African Women drafted and adopted the Women's Charter, which outlined for the first time demands for the recognition of women's rights, including equality, full political participation, and social economic justice for women across South Africa, regardless of race. And this was before they went to Beijing. This was a landmark document that laid the foundation for future women's activism and played a significant role in the anti-apartheid and women's rights movements. It was regarded as the first comprehensive women's rights document drafted in South Africa. Then the Freedom Charter was adopted in 1955. And it was to follow in the wake of all these iconic documents as one of the most important political documents in our country's history. Now, besides the documents I have referred to, there is a host of key documents that collectively shaped the vision, the tactics, and the ultimate achievement of freedom, equality, and justice in the struggle that started more formally in 1912. Remembering, of course, that our forebears had waged many other struggles way before. As the colonialists came, our forebears waged various struggles against them, including wars. In the Eastern Cape, for instance, there were wars that went on for 100 years. 9 wars, and in various parts of our country, there were wars and battles. But it was in 1912 when our glorious movement, the ANC, was formed to take the struggle forward against colonialism and later apartheid. And I'd like to enumerate these documents because we should know them and remember them. In some museum, these documents must all be laid out. At the very least, there are 14 key and iconic documents. Obviously, there are many more, but the ones that stand out, in 1923, as I referred to, was the Bill of Rights, which demanded land rights, equality, justice, representation, and freedom for all South Africans. Then the African Claims, which I've referred to, came in 1943, which was an early demand for civil and political rights. But political rights had been demanded even way before. Then there was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which, as we all know, was adopted elsewhere in the world globally. But it was affirmed by South Africa's liberation movements as a document that also advocated for the acquisition of rights for the people of South Africa. Then, in 1949, the leadership of the ANC Youth League came up with the idea of a program of action which was adopted, calling for militant action for liberation. Then in 1954, as I said, the Women's Charter, which called for equal rights for women, was adopted. Then followed the Freedom Charter. Then there was also another iconic document, which was the statement from the dock by President Nelson Mandela in the Rivonia trial in 1964, which set out ideas of resistance and equality. Then in the 70s, we had the Black Consciousness movement. They adopted a number of manifestos in the 70s advocating for psychological liberation and black pride. Then in 1976, there was the students' uprising, but it was backed up by a number of resolutions that the young students adopted, which demanded education reform and, more importantly, youth rights. So we've had the women's rights, then the youth rights, and of course political rights that were articulated in various documents. Then in the 80s, we had the UDF founding charter of 1983, which launched the mass democratic movement for equality and mobilized our people whilst the ANC was banned. Then in 1989, we had the Harare Declaration, which was adopted by the Organization of African Unity, the precursor to the African Union. It outlined the principles and preconditions for negotiations to bring an end to apartheid. It became a key policy roadmap for international community and the liberation movement. Then the African National Congress itself, noticing that negotiations were now going to have to take place, decided proactively to draft the constitutional principles, which were adopted in 1991 and a policy conference also, as I recall, 1992. And these principles strongly influenced the negotiation processes at CODESA and at the multi-party negotiating forum, and the content of South Africa's interim constitution in 1993, as well as the final constitution adopted in 1996. Now, the constitutional principles which were adopted then had obviously been inspired to be drafted and adopted by President O.R. Tambo and the National Executive Committee while still in exile. And you could say that those principles became our Bible as we went into negotiations. Then there was the interim constitution of the Republic of South Africa in 1993, which contained the constitutional principles, but also called for the establishment of the Constitutional Assembly, which would draft the final constitution. And in the end, we have the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa of 1996, which created finally the democratic state that we now have today, with the legal guarantees of equality and justice. Tonight, comrades, we focus on the Freedom Charter, a document which stands above all these other documents. The Freedom Charter laid out a vision for a non-racial, democratic, and just South Africa. It became a moral and ideological foundation for the anti-apartheid struggle and later influenced our country's constitution. The idea to have the Freedom Charter to be drafted was initiated by Professor Z.K. Matthews, who proposed that a Congress of the People should be convened to draw up a Freedom Charter. It was in the town of Craddock in the Eastern Cape, at a provincial conference of the ANC in 1953, that he raised concern about the deepening crisis in race relations in South Africa. He said, "I wonder whether the time has not come for the ANC to consider the question of convening a national convention, a Congress of the People, representing all the people of this country, irrespective of race or color, to draw up a Freedom Charter for the democratic South Africa of the future, close quotes. The drafting of the charter was principally led by the South African Congress Alliance, which included the ANC, the South African Indian Congress, the Congress of Democrats, and the Colored People's Congress. The Congress Alliance called on all South Africans to speak of freedom. It called on them to draw up their demands for the things that will make us free. In the call to the Congress of the People, the Congress Alliance said, almost poetically, let us speak of freedom, all of us together, African and European, Indian and colored, voter and voteless, privileged and rightless, the happy and the homeless, all the people of South Africa, of the towns and the countryside, let us speak together of freedom and of the happiness that can come to men and women if they live in a land that is free. The report of the ANC NEC to the 1954 annual conference said, never in South African history have the ordinary people of this country been enabled to take part in deciding their own fate and future. There is a need to hear the voice of the ordinary citizens of this land, proclaiming to the world their demands for freedom. Close quotes. From across the country, people responded in their great numbers, leading to the Congress of the People, which was the biggest single gathering of representatives of the people of South Africa. Now, to have the Freedom Charter drafted, the ANC itself sent 50,000 volunteers across the country to collect freedom demands from ordinary people, a massive grassroots democratic exercise. Now, it is recorded that many of the demands were written on pieces of paper, some even on toilet paper, some on cardboard. But the 50,000 volunteers went out to mobilize the people. At that time, the population of South Africa in 1955 was between 14 to 16 million. They had done a census, I think in 1951, and another one was to follow. So the estimates are that the population would have been 14 million. Now, if the 50,000 volunteers had gone out to touch the hand, the soul, the mind of everyone, each one would have had to meet and talk to 280 people. Now, the organizational ability of amassing 50,000 volunteers showed that the ANC of the 50s had broad-based mass support and that it was able to mobilize grassroots structures throughout the country. Even then, the ANC showed that it was an organization that relied heavily on strong participatory grassroots structures. And these structures gave the organization widespread reach, ensured democratic participation, facilitated community engagement, and enhanced mobilization and effective feedback as well. Now, we often talk about being able to mobilize thousands of volunteers for election work. Are there any lessons that we as the African National Congress can draw from the manner in which the ANC of the 1950s functioned in? The ANC's success in mobilizing thousands of people stemmed from a combination of its historical legitimacy, the strong local branches that it had, strategic partnerships that it formed with a variety of organizations and a variety of sectors, from religious to sports to culture, you name it. The ANC was able to network with all those, unions and what have you. And it was able also to embark on dynamic mass campaigns. And there was ongoing political education, which often took place at night in what were called night schools. And attention was also given to community needs. The ANC volunteers and leaders were able at the time to organize various manifestations. And some of those did not even need meetings. They just needed the network of our volunteers then. It reminds me, as I digress, to how, for instance, where the national chairperson used to work at a company called Matlaco, when the national executive of the NUM would have taken a decision for a strike, they would go back, and he used to be a shaft steward. He was right low, low, low at the bottom. And they would go back and not even hold meetings. They would use the M plan, through which had been conceptualized by Comrade President Nelson Mandela, through which you just communicate whatever has been decided on a one-to-one basis. Then those then go and communicate to their cells or their groups. And where he used to work, and he reports that they never held a meeting, and the 2,500 workers or so there, just the next day would be on strike. And the employers would be amazed that when was this planned? And it was this volunteer experience that the ANC used to work through as well. Now, these factors fostered active grassroots participation and deep community engagement, making the ANC of the 1950s a truly mass-based political movement in South Africa. Now, I always boast that we are the only organization that has a carpet type of network. Wherever you go in South Africa, you'll find an ANC branch, whether they like it or not. Now, this moment of memorializing the Freedom Charter, we also need to memorialize and draw inspiration to how our organization worked in the 50s when apartheid brutality was getting up to a high crescendo after the nationalists had won their election in 1948, and apartheid then started more formally and more brutally. They were able to organize even then. We have to ask ourselves whether we are able to continue with this rich legacy that the ANC had in the 50s. At the time of the Freedom Charter was drafted, apartheid was tightening its grip. The Freedom Charter boldly rejected racial hierarchy and demanded a society built on equality, democracy, and human rights. And you may recall that was a time when the Nationalist Party was propagating this fallacy about the swart gevaar, the fear of black people, deceiving white people in our country that black people wanted to drive them to the sea. Now, the apartheid government then saw the drafting or the adoption of the Freedom Charter as treasonous. It embarked on dawn raids across the country on the 5th of December 1956. They arrested leaders of our movement and put them finally on trial for treason. In Kliptown itself, they surrounded the gathering venue, raided the meeting, confiscated documents, photographed delegates, intimidated them. These actions were not random intimidation. They were also collecting material to criminalize the Freedom Charter and its authors. The 156 people from all races, both men and women, were arrested, and these are people whose only crime was to strive for a united, free, and equal country. The charge was based, that was sort of put against them, or to them, was based on the Freedom Charter adopted at the Congress of the People. The state claimed that the Freedom Charter was a blueprint for overthrowing the government. The Congress of the People was portrayed as the first step in a revolutionary conspiracy, and thus the intimidation at Kliptown was directly tied to building the case that they wanted to put against the 156 leaders who were arrested. By March of 1961, which is the length of the trial that took place from 56 to 1961, you will recall that Comrade Nelson Mandela was a lawyer, and he had to keep on going to practice law but be on trial. And you may remember the pictures that appeared with many of our people going to the trial and observing what was happening. By 1961, all of them had been acquitted and discharged. Now, looking back, we see that the Freedom Charter campaign had a profound impact or effect on the Congress movement and its organizational structures and capability. It cemented the non-racial character of the movement, both in terms of its content and its composition. It enabled the Congress movement to expand its organizational reach beyond the urban areas, transforming it into a fully fledged national movement. As Comrade Ishmael Vardy says or notes in his 1995 history of the Freedom Charter campaign, and he says, the campaign for the Congress of the People and the Freedom Charter introduced within the liberation movement a degree of ideological uniformity and cohesion that did not exist previously. The Freedom Charter provided a clear and concise set of policies, aims and objectives, as well as principles. Now, the Freedom Charter set out a 10-clause vision for a democratic, equal South Africa. Now, having been drafted through mass public consultation, where 3,000 people had come together, and having adopted this document at the Congress of the People, it was a document that was later to be used as a mobilizing, organizing weapon in the struggle for democracy. It was adopted by many organizations across the country, and there seemed to be competition, even in the 80s, and it was a defiance against apartheid. And I remember very clearly in the union movement, it was union after union adopting the Freedom Charter and COSATU, demonstrating that we are not afraid. You may have charged our leaders in 1956, but we, the inheritors of this movement and this struggle, we are not afraid. And it was so impactful. I remember, and I digress for a minute, when I was General Secretary of the NUM, whenever we had to employ even organizers, we would not really focus on their ability to organize. The first question we would ask, what is your name? Where do you come from? Do you know the Freedom Charter? Can you give us clauses of the Freedom Charter? And if you didn't know the Freedom Charter, you didn't get a job. Now, Comrade Mantashe was lucky. He just escaped because he became an organizer in the NUM. He just scraped through and was able to tell us a few clauses of the Freedom Charter. And I want... And I want, comrades, I may want to do a test one day to see how many of us know the clauses, the 10 clauses of the Freedom Charter. When you go back to your room tonight, go and check whether you know your Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter later influenced the values, as I said earlier, that are embedded in our democratic Constitution of 1996. Comrades, that Constitution has used the Freedom Charter as its foundation, as it should have. It called for a fundamental restructuring of all aspects of South African society. Among the most profound assertions to come out of the Congress of the People was that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. That statement was far more than an assertion of the right of residents in this country. It was more of an assertion of a common citizenship. It was a declaration that all South Africans, regardless of race, have a right to an equal share of the country's existence. They must share in the ownership of and access to the means of production. They must live a fair life, an equal life, and must have a fair share of the national income and public resources. The Freedom Charter called for the dispossessed and the disenfranchised to have equal ownership of their country. At the same time, it also made clear that white South Africans, the descendants of those who had come as colonizers and settlers, also had an equal right to call this country their home. This principle has guided the African National Congress over many decades and is foundational to the democratic society we are building. The Freedom Charter declares that the people shall govern. And as South Africans, we must be proud that for the last 3 decades, we have consistently held free and fair elections, and that these elections continue to reflect the will of the people. And this is not our declaration only. It is what even those from outside our country observe. When they come to observe our elections, they say our elections have reflected the will of the people. That was a clear aspiration that was set out in the Freedom Charter. Democracy is deeply entrenched in our society and amongst our people. We understand that democracy also is much more than just holding regular elections. We should actively encourage citizens to be involved in community building, in civic duties, in civil society, and in local campaigns. We should also continue to say that as citizens, we all have a responsibility. One of those responsibilities is to participate in voting. One of those responsibilities is to express our views. Now, we have set up a parliamentary process or system that even before our laws are passed, there needs to be community engagement where our people will also express themselves, so that it is not only those that have been elevated to the National Assembly and to the Council of Provinces who make laws without the people being heard. That is the true substance of our democracy. And comrades, this is something we should hold very dear. But it is also something that has been passed on to us by our forebears when they drafted the variety of documents, 14 documents that I've referred to. All of them, bar none, were drafted on a collective basis through thoroughgoing discussions, engagements, and deliberations. And that is the culture, and that is the tradition that we have as the people of South Africa. But it is this tradition that is deeply embedded in us as the African National Congress, as the members of the ANC. And this is where we get and draw our responsibility to be leaders of society from. Because over the years, the ANC has played a critical role in many of the documents that have defined the country that we are: collective action, deliberation, and engagement. So an active citizenry is vital for our democracy to flourish and for our country to succeed. The Freedom Charter envisages a developmental state that plays a leading role in ensuring social and economic opportunities to those previously denied. It envisages a state with sufficient legal authority and means to ensure decent working conditions and to take steps to improve the lives of the poor, the working class, and the marginalized. It envisages local councils where citizens must be consulted about development needs of their communities and actively involved in the implementation of developmental programs. The Freedom Charter says that all national groups shall have equal rights. The task of building a non-racial society remains fundamental to the work of our movement and to broader society. Now, through our policies, through our programs, and our practices, we need to advance non-racialism, ensuring that every South African appreciates their equal and irrevocable right to call this country home. And all South Africans must feel that they have a future here. But more importantly, we must do it as the African National Congress. Our structures, our programs must be representative of the non-racial character that we have embraced, the principles of equality of all national groups. It is vital that the ANC should live this principle. And we also need to build a non-sexist society, as set out in our charter, in which all forms of gender discrimination, oppression, exploitation, and violence are eradicated. This requires the achievement of full gender equality in all areas of life, from the home to the workplace. This requires the eradication of patriarchy, where men feel that they are better than women. And it also requires that there should be equality even in the economy, also on the sports field. We must be disturbed. We must be disturbed whenever we see structures, programs, activity that is either inspired by our own movement or by the government that is not balanced on a gender basis. It must concern us. And this is so vital. This is so vital because the women of our country constitute the majority section of our population. Now, as we mark the 30th anniversary of the Beijing platform, as I said when we opened, we need to ensure that we have effective policies and programs to advance the empowerment of women. Licela amanzi. Now, comrades, having recognized that gender-based violence and femicide is a national disaster, we need, as the African National Congress, to mobilize all the energy and all the resources of society to end gender-based violence. Now, a united and cohesive society requires also that we end exclusion, segregation, as well as marginalization experienced by persons with disabilities. Now, I say this advisedly because the core message of the Freedom Charter is about equality, equal treatment. The Freedom Charter calls on us to live this principle of equality. We need to confront discrimination, prejudice, and violence directed against members of the LGBTIQ+ community. Now, we need to do this to give real effect to the right to equality, not only contained in the Freedom Charter, but in our Constitution as well. The Freedom Charter declares that the people shall share in the country's wealth, and there shall be work and security. As we cement the political gains of the last 3 decades, our focus is firmly on the task of fundamental economic transformation. Now, at this NGC, that is what tomorrow we should also, through that commission that deals with the matter, focus on that. But the issue of fundamental economic transformation should run right across all the 16 commissions that we have. As a movement, we have resolved that rapid inclusive growth is necessary to generate employment and business opportunities and is essential to advance empowerment and redress of the imbalances of the past. Since 1994, we have enacted laws to advance the transformation of our economy. We have anchored broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Act and the Employment Equity Act. The progress we have made is undeniable. National Chairperson was giving his own mini address here when we started. As he was saying, we need to be alive and aware of the progress that has been made. For the progress that has been made to realize the aspirations that were articulated in the Freedom Charter is quite phenomenal. And those who say the Freedom Charter has not been implemented are lying, because the Freedom Charter is a living document. The Freedom Charter, as our forebears said, we will implement all these aspirations throughout our lives, working and struggling side by side together. And that is what we are doing now. So the progress we have made is undeniable, but needs to increase. We have seen real changes in ownership patterns. We've created a middle class, something that was unheard of. Many of our people have now been able to live a better life than they did before, but we want them to live even a much better life. That's what we are struggling for. We have seen changes in management, in enterprise development, and in skills development. And despite this progress, the average income of white households is still nearly 5 times higher than that of black African households. This is what the implementation of the Freedom Charter is aimed at achieving. That is why we need to intensify our drive for inclusive growth through infrastructure development, industrial policy, land redistribution, as well, whether they like it or not, black economic empowerment. Now, we do not agree with the suggestion that we must make a choice between growth and transformation. Economic growth without transformation entrenches exclusion, and transformation without growth is unsustainable. So the two must go together. Now, to build a country in which there is work and security, as articulated in the Freedom Charter, where all may share in its wealth, we must pursue growth and transformation throughout. Now, when it comes to work, it also talked about a minimum wage in one of its subtexts. And here, having adopted the Freedom Charter, we must say that we are pleased to have an ally like COSATU that organizes employed workers, that felt that there are many other workers who are not remunerated well, and urged us as the African National Congress to take up the struggle for a national minimum wage, as articulated in the Freedom Charter. And we have done that. We now have a national minimum wage. And we must applaud COSATU and say thank you to our ally. We may disagree on some issues, but on this one, we agreed. But as we were campaigning for the national minimum wage, and because we were starting at a low level and did not want to lose many jobs, COSATU leaders kept saying, UDP, I was DP then, they said, UDP, talk about it. We in COSATU will stand behind you. They didn't talk much, but they initiated it. The Freedom Charter says the land shall be shared among those who work it. The struggle to return land, the land of this country, to all the people of South Africa remains a historical and economic imperative. More than a century after its enactment, the Natives Land Act continues to define much of the landscape of our country. It is to address this persistent injustice that we are proceeding with the implementation of the Accelerated Land Reform Program to provide land to those who work it and who need it, including young people and women. Now, at government level, we are going to seek to take this to a higher level. so that we can entrench food security amongst our people and also rid our country of hunger and the malnutrition that we are beginning to see amongst especially young people. So we will be focusing on how we can get our people to work the land. We are working to ensure that the return of land is accompanied by robust programs of support to beneficiaries, promoting economic growth and sustaining food security. The Freedom Charter says all shall be equal before the law and all shall enjoy equal human rights. It is a measure of the weight of our history and the dreams of the future that the first right contained in the Bill of Rights, in our Constitution, is the right to equality. For centuries, our country has been defined by inequality. Inequality was the greatest sin that was committed against our people. I often say that the original sin was land dispossession, but inequality was one of the greatest sins. It is our deepest desire that our nation should be defined by equality. Since it was adopted nearly 30 years ago, our Constitution has enshrined and safeguarded the equal rights of all South Africans. Our courts, our democratic institutions, and public bodies have on many occasions upheld these rights. As the African National Congress and as a society, we need to continue to work to advance these rights and ensure that all people have access to the courts so that they can get protection for their rights. The Freedom Charter says the doors of learning and culture shall be opened. Over the course of 30 years of democracy, we have massively expanded access to education. This is one thing we have done. We have achieved almost universal attendance at schools and enabled access to higher education to students from poor and working class homes. We have seen a steady improvement in our educational outcomes, as witnessed in the matric results, as I said yesterday. Now, as we focus on early childhood development, something that we delayed for many years in paying attention to, but we are paying attention to it now, as well as the foundational years of learning, we have recognized that more needs to be done to achieve the skills revolution that I spoke about and we have always spoken about in the past. We need to overhaul our skills development system if we are to ensure that the doors of learning are fully opened, and as young people learn, they don't learn and then become unemployed. We want them to learn and immediately be able to participate as workers in the economy or as business people in the economy. The advent of democracy unleashed the richness and diversity of culture in our country. We need to embrace our culture, our heritage, and the infinite creativity of our people. We also need to make space for all forms of cultural expression to flourish, including our languages. Now, as leaders of the ANC gathered here, we come from all parts of our country. We speak all the languages of our country. We should make an effort as leaders of our country to learn some of the languages that are spoken by our people other than our own language. Now, it was Comrade Nelson Mandela who famously highlighted the importance of learning other people's languages. as a means of building connection, respect, and understanding. One of his well-known quotes on this subject is, if you talk to a man, because he used to talk like that, but it should be if you talk to a man or a woman in a language he or she understands, that goes to his or her head. But if you talk to him or her in his or her language, that goes to his or her heart. I like that. That it should go to her heart. That is the best part. Now, this statement by President Mandela emphasizes that communicating with someone in their own language is far meaningful and far more impactful than simply using a language they may know academically. It also shows empathy, respect, and willingness to bridge the cultural divides, the core principles that Madiba demonstrated throughout his life and his leadership. He believed that language can be a tool for reconciliation, for unity and deeper relationships amongst people of different cultures and backgrounds. The Freedom Charter says there shall be houses, security, and comfort. Since the advent of democracy, we have substantially expanded basic services such as electricity, water, sanitation, and houses. More than 80% of households today live in formal houses. Now, Comrade Chupu Matabata, when he was Premier of Limpopo, when I had gone there, and he said it not in a boastful manner, but he said it as a fact. He said, Comrade President, if you were to fly over many parts of Limpopo, you'll find that there are very few mud houses left. It means that many of our people have now are moving into formal dwellings. And that is a reality throughout the country. Now, that shows progress. We have built more than 3 million houses that we have allocated to our people. And I often say, comrades, this day and age, I now think that we build a house for about 160,000 rand. We build houses and just give them as assets to our people who had no assets, and in some cases, these are people who were dispossessed of their assets and had to move from one place to another. Now, that asset, which is 160,000 rand, one time when I was in the Western Cape, a DA MEC said to me that, President, we've given houses to people. And I said, yes. And I said, if you were to value the houses that we're giving to our people today that we've built for 160,000, obviously others we built much cheaper earlier, it means that we are giving them an asset base which is worth easily, in today's market prices, more than 300,000. Now, I often go around our continent and other countries and I ask, what is your housing program look like? Many countries, they say, people have to pay for houses in one way or another. And I said, do you give free houses? They said, only exceptionally. We are amongst the very few countries in the world that gives such assets to our people. And even now, as we now want to modernize our policy of making houses available, we will be implementing what was set out in the Freedom Charter, that there shall be houses and security for our people. Through social grants, free basic services, health care, free education, school feeding schemes, and other interventions, millions of South Africans have been lifted out of absolute poverty. We still have unacceptable poverty in our country, but we have been able over the 30 years to lift millions of people out of absolute poverty. Now, quite often, we hear of other countries, and that's precisely what the national chair was saying. We don't, as I think it's said in the Bible language, we don't count our blessings one by one and find that, yes, God has been good to us. We don't do that. Now, in many countries, they often count them in millions. You will hear them talk about their statistics. We've taken so many millions of people out of poverty. Now, when we look, as I said yesterday, at how we spend our national budget, our budget this year was 2 trillion rand, and 61% of that goes to the social wage. It goes to social grants. It goes to education, to feeding the young children at school. It goes to the 350 rand, which has now increased to maybe 370, and all that. That is what we envisaged in the Freedom Charter. And that is what we as the ANC also need to count. Yet, as we have noted, many communities continue to experience serious service delivery failures on a regular basis. Households struggle with the cost of living. We should never minimize this. We should recognize what has been done, but that should inspire us to do more and better. And this is what this NGC should be all about. We shouldn't navel gaze. We shouldn't rest on our laurels. We should now say, we have traveled so far, and we now must travel a much longer distance and improve the lives of our people. And yes, reduce poverty and inequality. These problems are compounded by the distances that people have to travel to work or social services and insufficient infrastructure in townships and rural areas. Reducing poverty and inequality is therefore one of our most important and urgent tasks as we pursue the vision of our forebears as articulated in the Freedom Charter that they adopted at the Congress of the People. The Charter says there shall be peace and friendship. South Africa is a force for peace, for partnership. We are a force for cooperation on the global stage. Our foreign policy emphasizes human rights, peace, mutually beneficial relationships. That's who we are, as defined in our Freedom Charter. We respect the rights and the sovereignty of all nations. Through international platforms, we contribute towards a more inclusive, just international order, using leadership positions to advance African and global South interests while strengthening multilateral institutions. The Freedom Charter was to later become the inspiration and guide for most of the extensive exercise of popular engagement in the history of our democracy, the involvement of millions of citizens also in drafting our new democratic constitution. The members of the Constituent Assembly, elected in 1994, were determined to that ordinary South Africans must feel that the Constitution belongs to them. Across the length and the breadth of the country, public participatory workshops, seminars, and hearings were held. There were talk shows on radio, on TV, and newsletters were distributed at taxi ranks and other public spaces. Around 250,000 submissions from the public were received on the refined working draft of the Constitution alone. In both its content and its spirit, and in the way that it was produced, our Constitution is firmly grounded, not only on the substance of the Freedom Charter, but on the way the Freedom Charter was drafted through the consultation process that took place. Now, as we embark on a national dialogue, we must seek to harness that spirit that is so uniquely South African. The national dialogue seeks to bring all South Africans together to discuss the challenges that our country is facing and to define a common vision of a shared future. In public dialogues that will take place in every ward in the country, as I said yesterday, and in which will be organized in every sector, citizens will be able to put forward their concerns, their wishes, but more importantly, their suggestions and solutions on how we can build a better country. Like the Freedom Charter campaign, we expect that the national dialogue process itself will have a positive impact on our society. Comrades, in the year that we celebrate 70 years of the Freedom Charter, we celebrate also the centenary of the birth of two giants of our revolution. Isithwalandwe siyaparangwe, Mama Gertrude Shope, and Isithwalandwe siyaparangwe, Ndate Cholo. Earlier this year, we bid a sad farewell to Mama Gertrude Shope. As a member of the Federation of South African Women and as an organizer of the Women's March, together with Comrade Sophie de Bruyn, to the Union buildings, and later as the president of the ANC Women's League, Mama Shope had a profound grasp of the realities facing the women of our country. So we celebrate her centenary. She was a pioneer who was instrumental in shifting attitudes within and outside our movement on the place of women in the struggle and in society. As an activist, and as an organizer, and as an internationalist, Ma Shope embodied the cadre that our movement needs today. The dedication, the humility, the tirelessness effort, and the deep love for the people of South Africa. Ndate Cholo is a soldier of peace, a champion of the working class, who has been an active participant in seminal moments of our revolution. A member of the Luthuli detachment, he was at the forefront of the armed struggle. As a member of the South African Congress of Trade Unions, the ANC, Umkhonto weSizwe, Ndate Cholo is an embodiment of our revolutionary alliance. As we honor his contribution, we have a responsibility to preserve and to strengthen that alliance and to make it a united and cohesive instrument of revolutionary change. Now, at his 100th birthday, on the 20th of October this year, Ndate Cholo said that the ANC remains the hope of our people. He called on the leadership of our movement to serve the people with commitment so that we may change the lives of the people. We are grateful for his wise counsel and his enduring revolutionary spirit. You may recall that at the January 8th, we awarded isithwalandwe siaparangwe to him. I was able to have the privilege of going to robe him and to hand him over his isithwalandwe and his certificate. I was privileged. The 70th anniversary of the adoption of the Freedom Charter is also about celebration, but it is also about reflection as well as mobilization. We must use this occasion, comrades, to reflect on our gains, but also, more importantly, on our shortcomings. We must mobilize all South Africans not only to speak of freedom, but to work together to achieve that freedom. Like I'm a volunteer of the 1950s, those 50,000 volunteers that were brought in for the drafting of the Freedom Charter. We need to reach out to our people to discuss this Freedom Charter, as the National Chairperson was saying. Like them, we need to be disciplined. We need to be earnest, we need to listen to the people, and we need to work together to address their concerns. In an article written on the occasion of the anniversary of the Freedom Charter, the revolutionary intellectual Comrade Mzala said, "We defend, fight, die for the ideals that are enshrined in the Freedom Charter, not because it is an all-time document, but because it is a revolutionary guide to a life free of misery and oppression. It is the demands of the people that have yet to be won. These are the kinds of ideals which most nations achieve, ideals for which men and women stubbornly and heroically resist torture in detention and grueling lives in exile, ideals for which our martyred dead stood firm and unflinching in the last minute of their lives. Such ideals cannot be taken lightly," he said. So, comrades, the people must govern, and calls for democratic government based on the will of the people is clearly set out in the Freedom Charter. And the second aspiration, so that when I test you next time on whether you know the Freedom Charter or not, is about all national groups shall have equal rights, rejects discrimination and all that. The third one, the people shall share in the country's wealth. The fourth one, the land shall be shared among those who work it. The fifth one, all shall be equal before the law. The sixth one, all shall enjoy equal human rights. The seventh one, there shall be work and security. And the eighth one, the doors of learning and culture shall be opened. And the ninth one, there shall be houses, security and comfort. And the 10th one, there shall be peace and friendship. So, comrades, those are the clauses of the Freedom Charter. Now, as we discuss all the issues we have to discuss on whether the NDR is in reverse or whether the NDR has stalled, we also need to ask ourselves the extent to which these aspirations set out in the Freedom Charter have been addressed. And by all means, comrades, we have touched on a number of them. But as Comrade Mzala said, we should continue to actually implement the Freedom Charter. As the National Chairperson said, the Freedom Charter is a living document. So let us all in this room this evening, all of us who love our people and our country, now stand up and hold hands right now and say together, these freedoms we will fight for, side by side, throughout our lives, until we have won our liberty. Mandla! Forward to the Freedom Charter, forward!